Okay.
Dan kan ik net starten.
It's 9 o'clock?
Maar ik kan ook eens zeggen, ik ging heel graag uit, maar dan moet ik echt de les zien en ik denk dat
Good morning all, over here and over there. Welcome to the last but one session of this conference already. And there are 4 papers presented in this session. The first one is Trust Evidence Logic by 4 names: Alessandro Aldini, Gianluca Quezzi, Pierluigi Graziani, and Mirko Tacchiravelli. And it will be presented by Marco. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Today I will present you a joint work with, as you can see, 3 of my colleagues, Professor Alessandro Aldini and Dr. Gianluca Quezzi, which are online, so I think they will participate. Then Professor Pierluigi Graziani and myself. So what will we see today? First of all, we will have a brief look at what trust is, its characteristics, and why it's useful in a computer science environment. Then we will see how trust is usually represented in those environments. So we'll see, again briefly, the state of the art about trust in digital environments. We will move on into the logical language we developed, and we will see why we developed it. And finally, we will see what we are still doing and can still be done based on this language. So what is trust? Our definition of trust is basically a subjective probability that something will happen. This is taken from Diego Gambetta, an economist, quite famous, which defined the concept in general. This is quite specific as a concept, so if you look at the philosophical literature, you might find that the concept is way richer than this simple definition, but for our purpose this will work. So why is it important? Well, it is important because trust, first of all, fosters cooperation. So if we take whatever social environment we have, and digital environments are social environments, having trust enables cooperation to happen easier. We also know that trust in general reduces the complexity of decision making, especially in situations where uncertainty is present. Finally, a third element which is important is that trust supports the development of environments perceived as secure, so safe environments. All those characteristics have been studied, and they're all quite important, at least from my perspective, for whatever social community we might find. And as I said, online environments are a prime example of a really rich social environment. So this said, how do we usually represent trust online? Well, the easiest and most direct way to represent trust online is through the use of reputation models. So you might be used to the star system. This is used by both eBay and Amazon. So what happens is basically users provide feedback on something through the use of stars and comments. Then the system aggregates those comments, those evaluations, and provide to the other users end result, which is used by the user to decide whether to trust or not a vendor or a service or whatever. So they're quite useful as a means to represent trust because they're easy to implement. So you only have to have a database where users can input their opinions. Then you put those data together in a graphical way or even as a number, and then you return it to the end user, which can easily perceive the value and use it for himself. So why should we improve those models? Well, they have 2 issues, at least the way we studied them. The first issue is that they do not take into consideration expertise. So you should always follow first the advice of a wise man instead of a common man. And the problem is that in reputation models, all users' feedback are equal. Like, you never know whether the people who evaluated something are experts in the field, or your everyday layman who simply happened to purchase that specific item. And the other issue is that they're not context related. So sometimes you have vendors which sell multiple products, and their evaluation, their reputation is based on basically every product they sell, and there's no specific reference to if they're good, for example, booksellers, and horrible at selling gym equipment. They're all put into the same category. So they might be great booksellers, but terrible gym equipment sellers, and their reputation would be, let's say, in the middle, but that doesn't really represent what they are. And by the way, the first picture is a reference to Lord of the Rings, one of the wisest mages on the planet. The other one is a quite famous illusion, which is ambiguous between a duck and a rabbit. Therefore, only context can disambiguate. So how did we improve on those reputation models? We tried to build a logic, so a language, formal language, which managed to represent trust. And at the same time, trust has reputation in this case. So we took the basic intuition by computer scientists, and we tried to represent also the elements which we thought were missing in reputation models. So expertise and context sensitivity. So our syntax, the syntax of our language, is quite straightforward, nothing really fancy, except for maybe this last element here that you can see. So basically it's a modal language where we have well, falsehood, normal propositional formulas, negations, disjunctions, and those kind of elements which are our trust formulas. So in our language, trust is represented by this kind of logical formula. And basically what we are looking at is that there's a given context, B, there's a given threshold, and threshold is used by us as a means to evaluate basically the propensity of trusting by the agent. So a given agent will trust, like there's people who trust easily, there's people who trust in more, let's say, harder. And those kind of threshold can represent this kind of phenomenon. Then we have the formula, which has to be trusted. So in this case, using Gambetta's definition, which probability we think is high enough to label it as will likely happen or is likely true. And those kind of formulas are basically our novel element inside the language. So before moving into the semantics, let's make an example. So how do we interpret those kind of formulas? So we have graphs, and basically those are simple probabilistic labeled state transition systems. And in particular, we will have some states, and for us, states are basically agents. So instead of interpreting those as actual states of the world or possible worlds, as philosophers would say, we use them as agents in a social network. So all the nodes of our structures will be basically people. And then we have arrows connecting those people, and those arrows are basically queries. So questions we ask other agents about their opinion on certain facts. So everybody connected by an arrow is basically someone you're interested in his opinion. So let's say you're G, and G stands for Gianluca in our example. We will see all the elements. A is Alessandro, M is Mirko, and P is Pierluigi. So having an arrow going from Gianluca to Alessandro means that Gianluca is interested in the opinion of Alessandro. But now we label also those transitions by the context. So in this case, Gianluca is interested in Alessandro's opinion, but only concerning cybersecurity. And then we have this expertise value. So expertise value is quite strange because usually we attribute expertise to as an objective property of an agent. But in our case, it's basically a subjective perception of the first agent about the second agent. Is how relevant I believe his opinion is for me. So how expert I perceive him to be. And as you can see, we simply attribute a value, and then we have the whole system. As you can note, we can have reflexive arrow. That means that you're also evaluating your opinion on the matter. But take a look for exactly in this example for the context C, which we will see are restaurants. Basically, Gianluca doesn't take into consideration his evaluation. He has no opinion about restaurants, so it doesn't matter what his opinion is. So he just refers to other people. Note that we could also have basically uniquely reflexive arrow. If you're interested in your opinion only in a certain specific scenario, then you will simply have the reflexive arrow with expertise 1. So now let's see a complete example. So we might have also, as I said, so C will stand for the context of restaurants. B will be the context of cybersecurity. Then we will have, as I said, Gianluca, Alessandro, Mirko, and Pierluigi. We have 3 propositions. So the first one is that Ciacci, which is a quite famous Italian restaurant near Urbino. It's basically an all-you-can-eat version of an Italian restaurant. So if you ever come, I will take you there. So Ciacci is a good restaurant, is the first proposition. Then we have that Ciacci is a cheap restaurant. And finally, we have that TLS 1.3 is secure. So each agent has his own opinion about the specific propositions. So for example, Gianluca doesn't believe that TLS 1.3 is secure. Alessandro believes that TLS 1.3 is secure, but neither believes that Ciacci is a good restaurant, nor that Ciacci is cheap. And we have Mirko that believes that Ciacci is a good restaurant, but it's not cheap. And finally, Pierluigi that believes that Ciacci is a good restaurant, and it's also cheap. So now that we attributed those opinions, we can actually ask ourselves whether some kind of trust formulas hold in this kind of system. So for example, we might ask if in the context of cybersecurity, the formula TLS, so 1.3 is secure, is true to at least degree 0.74. And how do we do it? Well, we look basically at all agents that, like, let's say we ask this question for Gianluca. So obviously we have to choose an agent which has to trust or not the actual proposition. So let's start with Gianluca. So does Gianluca trust theta to at least degree 7.4 in the context of cybersecurity? Well, we look at all his opinion, like all his transitions, so all the opinion he looks for. So he asks Alessandro, and he looks at his own opinion, and then we sum them up. So depending on whether the actual opinion is positive or negative. So in this case, yes, Gianluca trusts this proposition, because even though he doesn't believe himself the proposition to be true, Alessandro's expertise basically overcomes his personal evaluations. So the end result is that he does trust that to be true. Let's make another example. So let's see if Gianluca again trusts that TLS that Ciacci is cheap to at least degree 0.5 in the context of restaurants. Well, in this case, no. So this is a particular case because even though Pierluigi is the most expert between all the agents, so we have Pierluigi, Mirko, and Alessandro. Alessandro and Mirko are 0.25 and 0.26. Pierluigi is way above those two levels because it's 0.49, but his opinion alone is not enough to overcome the opinions of the many others who basically claim against the proposition. Therefore, Gianluca won't trust Ciacci to be a good restaurant. Proposition was psi. So he won't trust that Ciacci is cheap.
I'm very sorry, I should warn you 5 minutes before, but it's already 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I'll go quickly. I'll just tell you, so I'll be really, really quick. So So this is basically the semantics. Yeah, so I can show you that. Okay. So the semantics is quite standard. So it's basically the representation of what I just told you of all the elements. Then we have a standard definition of truth of a formula, and in this case, as I said, we simply sum up the values of the opinions of others. I'll just tell you some results we had. So we basically defined bisimilation on the language, and we proved that the modal equivalence through bisimilation preserves logical validity. So we do have a logical characterization through bisimilation. We also gave a really simple axiomatic system, and we proved that the system is sound and weakly complete with respect to these axiomatic systems by all possible models. We also had slightly more precise proofs of various instances, like adding new axioms and proving soundness and completeness, adding some properties on the semantics. And finally, the only thing I wanted to say is that what we're trying to do is that we're trying to explore the possibility of formalizing more refined concepts of trust, so moving on to more richer conceptions of trust. We're also working on decidability results, and we're at a good point on them. So we have decidability results of the language. We're constructing a sequence calculus about the language. And finally, we're exploring the possibility of moving from Boolean opinions, so either it is true or not, to multi-valued opinions. Okay. Sorry for taking.
Great, thank you for your interesting talk. Other questions from audience over here?
If this looks very interesting, but to make the case for argumentation, because I'm an argumentation person. So if I ask you, is Chachi a good restaurant, then you say yes, and then I might ask you why. So is there any hope for representing reasons for belief in this approach, or is that something completely different?
Well, I should say that you might be able to do that by just looking at how a given agent got to the proposition. So maybe you have that phi implies psi, and you have phi, and that's why he believes that psi is true, and that's why he reports that opinion to you. Like, you could potentially do that by looking simply at the structure of the single agents or states of the system.
Okay.
Questions online? Shota has a question. Please go ahead.
Oh, yes, thank you. You told that the weak completeness holds, and how about strong completeness?
Okay, I didn't really understand the question. Are you asking?
Strong completeness.
Okay, why do we not have strong completeness? Well, at the moment,
yeah,
because the system fails to be compact, so we do not have strong completeness, but we're working on that as well. We're trying to look at possible ways to modify the semantic structures to obtain strong completeness as well.
Thank you very much.
More questions online?
Laura.
Hi. In the context of description logics, there is a notion of threshold concept, which might be related to your approach, as essentially one evaluates up to which threshold the concept is satisfied, considering the definition of a concept based on other concept with some weights, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just to point, it's not really related maybe, but the idea might be of having a threshold at least might be related. Having different concepts, maybe concepts, different concepts might correspond to different contexts. I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure about that last point you made, but yes, we inspired ourselves looking at description logics as well for the threshold. I'm not sure if you can relate contexts with concepts, because they seem to be really different kind of entities, at least metaphysically. But yeah, it might work, I don't know.
Okay, I think
Thank you. Thank you very much.
we leave it at this. Try it again. I think the next one, yes, I already see the speaker online. The next talk is Probabilistic Deontic Logic by Vincent de Wit, Dragan Doder, and Joshua Nij. Please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me correct? Good.
Yes.
Yes, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. You can start.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. I'm Vincent de Wit, and I'm going to present probabilistic deontic logic, which was written with Dragan Doder and John Jules Meyer. It was in light of my master thesis. Thank you very much for having me on this conference. It's my first conference, so it's kind of an honor. Also in Prague, it's a nice city. It's a pity I can't be there. So let me explain what this logic looks like. The notion that we try to formalize with this logic is uncertainty about norms. And using uncertainty about norms, we can also describe learning of norms by changing uncertainties. So nowadays with Corona, we also are sometimes uncertain about, for example, the norm of shaking hands. Also, at some point in life, you have to learn that you should be quiet while in the library. And when you go to different countries, sometimes people drive on a different side of the road. These kind of things relate to the logic or to the uncertainty about norms that we try to formalize. So this is our goal, to create such a logic that formalizes this uncertainty about norms. And our starting point is monadic deontic logic and probabilistic logic. And our result is probabilistic deontic logic. And this logic is sound and complete and decidable. Okay, so first I will explain the two logics, deontic logic and probabilistic logic, after which I will show the model construction for probabilistic deontic logic and say something about future work. And as you can see here on the right, there's a robot bending some norms. And yeah, it would be good for this robot to be able to change its certainties about which norms hold. Okay, so we have deontic logic and probabilistic logic. Deontic logic is about ought or obligated. The deontic logic that we use is monadic deontic logic. And it has an operator O, which is ought or obligated. And it can be used to make sentences like OQ. Q is obligatory. And we can use that to make a sentence like obligation to be quiet. And probabilistic logic has a W operator or function describing the probability or uncertainty of a formula. And it can be used to take an atom P or formula, and then we can say the probability of fork is at least beta. Then I will explain the MDL model. And the MDL model is a modal logic with a modal model, which is a tuple W are V, W is a set of worlds, R is a binary relation that is serial, so there's no dead ends, and this is used to keep it from deontic explosion, that everything is obligatory. And there's a valuation system V that assigns to each atom a set in which of worlds in which the atom is true. Then the language and satisfaction is the language is rather straightforward. We just have propositional atoms closed under negation and conjunction, and the O operator. And atoms are evaluated using this V valuation. And obligation is evaluated using the accessibility relation. On the right, you can see an example where the red arrows show that the two deontic accessible worlds, both until psi, meaning that in W1 there's an obligation to psi. So this is MDL. And now I will explain something about probabilistic logic. Probabilistic logic or model is a tuple Sx, mu, and pi, where S is a set of states. X is a sigma algebra, for example, the power set. Mu is a probability measure, where it has some properties like total probability mass of 1 and sigma additivity. And pi is a truth assignment that takes a set or takes a state S and the propositional atom P and assigns it true or false related to the circumstances of the propositional atom in the state. The language is based on weight formulas. The weight formula is a linear combination of weight terms, these W's, and they are also closed under negation and conjunction. And we evaluate them using the measure mu. And to do this, we use the truth set, which is the set of states in which this atom is true. On the right, you can see that there's 4 states, which 2 of them until P and the other 2 do not until the negation. And so to check whether the weight of P is greater than beta, we have to look at the measure of S and S prime. All right, those are the 2 logics that we are combining. And now I will show how we combine the 2 logics. The language is as follows. First, we still have MDL language. And then where we previously used the propositional atoms as arguments to the weight terms, we now use the MDL formulas. Later, I will show you the axiomatic system, and there's a formula for mode exponents, and it uses a theta. And this theta is either or both the phi and the f, so it holds for both. And this language is able to create the following formula. The weight of an obligation phi greater than beta, which means that there's obligation, or well, in our case, actually a norm to phi. And we have a certainty of at least beta that this norm holds. Okay, so then we have the language. We also want a model. And the model is Sx, mu, and tau. So it looks a lot like the probabilistic logic. And it differs only for tau. Tau takes the place of pi, and tau relates to each state in the probability space MDL model. A pointed MDL model, so it's also a world, and we can use this to evaluate formulas. And we evaluate formulas in the following way, using again the truth set for a formula, where it contains states when the related pointed MDL model entails a formula, the formula phi that is taken the truth set of. And so if each of these states is contained in the truth set of this phi, then the whole model satisfies this formula. And we can also look at the probability formulas, and they do not change, except that there's now an MDL formula in the truth set of the measure. And so this is the satisfaction relation. Then there is, I have an example to bring all of these parts together. We can see here on the right the state space or the probability space with states S, and on the left we have MDL model, a pointed MDL model. And we see here on the bottom line, or not, well, not the entirely bottom line, but on this line over here, we can see tau relating an S to a model, and we can see that in this one there's obligation to Q, and this one also, but the other two do not have obligation to Q, actually a negation of obligation to Q. So if we want to look at what the weight is of this obligation to Q, and if it's greater or equal than alpha, then we have to look at the measure mu and the truth set of obligation Q. And this truth set is S and S double prime. And so we can add those measures and look at if it's greater than alpha. And then we know if it's true or not, the formula. So this is how the models look like for probabilistic deontic logic. Here's the axiomatization that I was talking about. As you can see, the modus ponens has a theta, and P-dis is also, P-distribution is also rather interesting. This here on the bottom line, but it's a straightforward combination of the two axiomatic systems. Only tautology and modus ponens occurred in both. Our result is that the logic is sound and complete and decidable, which is a great result. Lastly, something about future work. Well, this future work is actually sort of past work, because I already did it for my master thesis, where we changed monadic deontic logic to dyadic deontic logic. And the dyadic deontic logic can use a conditional in the obligation. And we also changed the probability structure, where we can use weight terms and relate them to agents. So then you have introspectional weight terms and reason and higher theory of mind reasoning. And this also works for MDL and DDL. Here are the citations, most important ones. And yeah, thank you for listening. Are there questions?
Questions over here?
So thank you. Could you give an interesting example of an interesting inference that you can make in a combined logic that illuminates some issue or some concept?
Oh, an interesting.
Just a nice illustration of what you can do with the logic.
Right. Well, maybe Northern Light is a good one. Like my background, I live in the Netherlands, and the Northern Light doesn't occur here. So you could say that usually you don't. It's normally that it's you can see it, but it's very sometimes it does happen. So you could discount it a little bit, the certainty. But yeah, maybe maybe the robot is actually also a good example, where you have apparently this robot thinks that has a problem with certainties. Maybe he has a bottle of some poisonous or alcohol thing and a gun. So maybe he thinks that one thing is normal and the other thing is also normal, and it's kind of in some weird position where he thinks both are acceptable at the same time. Yeah, it's a difficult question.
Okay, we leave that up for this. I think Laura's hand is from the previous talk. So now Nico has a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Your logic is decidable. So I guess you have an algorithm to do reasoning. Have you thought about the complexity of this algorithm or the complexity of the logic in general?
My supervisor Dragan developed the decidability proof, and I think he used a filtration method. I did not, it didn't cross my mind, the complexity, but I can imagine that the complexity can be larger, quite large. Yeah, I'm not completely sure what the complexity looks like and if there are constraints on that.
Yeah. So I guess it generalizes propositional probabilistic logic, right? Because if you do not use this model operator O, it's basically propositional logic, right? So I was wondering, when you compare this to results for propositional probabilistic logic, how much more complicated does it get when you use this model operator O?
I think you can add any language to it.
Yeah, sure. But you added this special model operator, right? I think this is the main, I don't know, contribution.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering how much more complicated does it get through this? Maybe it's difficult to tell. I don't know. I was just wondering. Maybe it's
well, in the soundness and completeness proof, we both just call for completeness of deontic logic. So if you have a logic that is sound and complete, I think you could just insert it, I think. Yeah, I think that is possible, but I'm not, I haven't really run through it. But I think it's possible.
Right, thank you.
Okay, then we have.
I think was Dragan wanting to add something to the answer. As one of the authors.
Okay.
If I have a minute.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, because actually Vincent's thesis was on completeness, so it's maybe this part on decidability was also mainly done with others, so it's not full paper on completeness. And yeah, what complicates the most is how we construct the model when we prove decidability. So we use the filtration. So if there is a model, there is a model that is not very big. So its size, I mean, its size in the sense of the number of states is bounded by the size of the formula. But then what is the problematic? Each state actually gets more complex. So we can have several of possible accessibility relation just for deontic logic inside and the states inside. How to say that each state of probabilistic logic contains one more possible world model, which is for deontics. So that complicates the logic, and that's why we don't have any complexity results, but we really don't expect it's anything low. So it's something very, very high probably.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Nick Pfeiffer, is your question short and can it be answered shortly because time is over?
I don't know. My question is related to the first question, to the conceptual one. And the example you gave with the Nordic light sounds to me more like an epistemic thing, right? Usually there are no northern lights visible. But I wonder do you have really the ontic norms, like you should not kill, for example, right, as a norm? And here I can hardly see whether you could say something like you should just kill a little bit or not. I mean, or does the rule only holds in certain circumstances? And this, so the intuition is not really clear to me.
Okay. Yeah, I did that. There's one example that I was thinking about, but it's maybe also a bit a weird example, but I was thinking about Hitler. That maybe you could think you shouldn't kill, but if you killed Hitler, you would have stopped the Second World War, maybe. So maybe then in not all cases you shouldn't kill. Yeah, I would say something like this. Yeah.
Okay, I would like to leave it at this because time is over now for this talk. And we move on to the next talk, which is iterated conditionals and characterization of p-entanglement by Angelo Giglio and Giuseppe Sanfilippo, and the speaker is in Prague.
Okay, thank you. This is a joint work with Angelo Giglio, and there is a long ongoing interest in combining logic and probability. The study of logical operations among conditional events is a relevant topic of research in many fields: probability logic, multivariate logic, artificial intelligence, and other things. Usually the result of the conjunction or the disjunction of conditional event is defined as a conditional event, that is a trivial logical entity, which can be true, false, or void. However, in this way, classical probabilistic properties are not still valid. In our approach, the conjunction and the disjunction of conditional events are not conditional events in general, but suitable conditional random quantities. And with the value in the interval 0, 1, and concerning the prevision of these conditional random quantities, properties similar to that one related to the unconditional case are still valid. For instance, the Freshoff bounds are valid, the generalized De Morgan law, inclusion-exclusion formula, the import-export principle, it is not valid, but this is good because to the case of the iterated conditional, we avoid what are the so-called Lewis triviality results. So, as Nicky Pfeiffer introduced on the other day, recalled, given two conditional events A given H and B given K, the conjunction of these two conditional events is defined as the following conditional random quantity, which take value 1 if both the conditional events are true, 0 if at least one of the two conditional events is false, and in the case where the first conditional event is void and the second one is true, take the value x. What is x? X represents the probability of A given H. In the other case, it is y, which is the probability of B given K. And when both the conditioning events are false, which means that both the conditional events are void, then in that case, take the value z, which is the prevision of this object. which in the betting scheme represent the amount that you agreed to pay in order to receive this quantity that I listed before. So this is in the case of 2. In the case of n conditional events, we have this structure here. And then in this case, it is not only 5 values, there are some more values. And if you want to summarize this in the case of the betting scheme, your provision for this quantity represents the amounts that you agreed to pay in order to receive 1 if all the conditional events are true, which is the normal value when you consider the conjunction of just events, all events are true. You receive 0 when at least one of the conditional events is false, and you receive the provision of the conjunction of that conditional events which are void otherwise. In particular, when all the conditional events are void, you receive back what you paid in the bet. So, in this case, there are cases where the bet, in some sense, you win the bet, you lose, you receive back what you paid, and you receive back some money that usually are bigger than what you paid because of the threshold bounds. Indeed, as you can see here, the threshold of bounds are respected. What does mean this? A sharpness, that if we consider a probability assessment on a family of conditional events and their conjunction, then coherence requires that the provision of this object should be between the Lukasiewicz T-norm and the maximum and the minimum T-norm, which is the same formula valid for unconditional events when we consider the conjunction. This is the case where we have just 2 events. We have the tetrahedron with these vertices. So, concerning the iterated conditional, then we generalize this formula here, which represent the case of the representation of a conditional event as a conditional random quantity, when you receive 1, 0, or p based on this case. So, by using this formula, we can generalize the iterated conditional, which is this one, where we exploit the notion of conjunction. And then we have these cases here, okay? I have no time to consider all these cases. And by using also this kind of iterated conditional, in a previous paper we showed that the P consistency of atoms, the P entailment of atoms can be simply characterized by this relation. What is in our approach the P entailment of atoms? It is in the notion of coherence, the P entailments of atoms can be represented as this characterization, where we say, given a probability assessment, where we give a probability 1 to all the conditional events in the premises, then coherence requires that the probability of the conclusion should be equal to 1. In this case, we say that an inference rule is P-valid. Then this relation can be characterized in this way by showing that this iterated conditional is equal to 1. This is been shown in a previous paper, and in this paper we generalize this characterization to the case of n conditional events. So for instance, here we have a list of classical inference rules which are valid in system P, and here, and not only, and here we proved that all these objects are constant and equal to 1. Usually these are, if you consider this quantity is not constant, but if the inference rule is p-valid, we have that this is equal to 1 and vice versa. So, some rules that are not valid, for instance, it is this one, affirmation to consequent, and this, as you can see, we have the premise in this case is C given A and C, and the conclusion is A. And this object, in this case, it is not constant, it does not coincide 1, and then this rule is not p-valid. But for the modus ponens, for instance, here, this rule is valid. So, as we say, we characterize this relation here to the case where we have a family of n conditional events. Now, for instance, if you consider transitivity, we have the set of premises C given B, B given A, and we know that this does not entail C given A, so transitivity is not p-valid. And this can be shown by the fact that this object is not constant and equal to 1. Now one can say, what we can add to the set of premises in order to have a p-valid rule? One possibility could be, for instance, to add these conditional events. And then in order to check this one can check if the corresponding iterated conditional is constant and equal to 1. And the same for other formulas, inference rule like this one. Now, in order to do this, we needed to generalize the notion of a conditional, of iterated conditional to the case where the antecedent and the consequent are conjunction of a finite family of conditional events. By using the same structure of before of circle given square and so on, by using this structure, we define the iterated conditional in this way, and we observed some nice properties. One, it is this one, by definition, which generalizes the compound probability theorem to the case of the unconditional event. The other one is this one, which generalizes the case where we have that a conditional event E given H is equivalent to E and H given H. And then finally we observed that if we consider the iterated C given F, C of F and given C of F, this is constant and coincides with the 1, which in terms of p-entailments means of course that a family p-entails itself or its conjunction, the end rule. So this is not so easy to prove in this case with all the possible value. So in a previous paper, we characterized the p-entailments in terms of some property related to the conjunction of conditional events. For instance, F p-entails this one if the conjunction of the premises amounts to the conjunction of the premises plus the conclusion. Or justly, if the inequality, this one, is satisfied. This has just the same property that we want in the case of unconditional events when we want that some events p-entails a conclusion. Then, in this case, we proved that F p-entails this object, where F is a family of n conditional events, if and only if this iterated conditional is constant and equal to 1. This one coincides with the iterated conditional where we have in the consequent this one and the conjunction of F. In particular, this if we have just events when the conditioning events are omega, then we obtain this relation here, which say that a family of n events p-entail further events if and only if when we consider E of n plus 1 given the conjunction of all of them is equal to 1, which can be related to the deduction theorem in logic.
You have 3 minutes left.
2 minutes?
3
minutes. Thank you. So we apply this, for instance, to transitivity. And in transitivity, as I said before, the transitivity is not p-valid. We have shown in a paper, a joint paper with Angelo Giglio and Nicky Pfeiffer, that a kind of weaker version of transitivity, where in some sense, if we add another conditional events here, and we assume a positive probability, transitivity is valid. However, in this case, in order to show that transitivity is not valid, we observe that this object is not constant and equal to 1. For instance, we have this value here, and if we assign probability of B given A equal to 1 and on BC given A equal to 0, it follows that this is equal to 0, and so this is not constant. So, as I said before, if we add this probabilistic constraint, transitivity is valid. However, in this case, we added this conditional event, and then it is similar to assume that this has a probability 1 if we consider this inference rule. And we already know that since this is valid, this is also should be valid. This weaker version of transitivity was also considered in other papers. So, by using this, this situation, we obtain this value here, which seems that it is not this one here, but which amounts to this object. But by doing some properties here, it can be shown that this here, this iterated here, is equal to 1. By exploiting this property, that C of f given C of f is equal to 1. Another example, with new example, which we made in these days, is related to Camestres, which is a categorical syllogism based on the idea of Aristotle. And here we consider that B given C and not B given A, and A given C. Then we observe that if we consider any subset of this family, it does not entail the conclusion, because in that case, this object does not coincide with the one. But if we add, in some sense, this two with the conclusion is Camestres. If we add this one, then we obtain that this object is constant and equal to 1, which validates the inference rule. And then we can consider inference rule with the 4 premises, 5 premises. Of course, need some computation, but it can be done. So, we generalize the notion of iterated conditional by introducing the random object of iterated conditional of the C of F2 given C of F1, where F2 F1 are a family of conditional events, and C is the conjunction. We show some property for this object. For instance, that C of F given C of F is constant and equal to 1, and we characterize the P entailment from a family F to a further events. I will illustrate with some example. We observe that this is a particular case we obtain in the case of unconditional events, which is useful because in some sense our theory generalizes the classical situation where we have just events. So usually we think on conjunction of event, but it can be shown that the conjunction of event is just the conjunction of two conditional events where we assume that the conditioning event have a probability 1. This is so we should look in a more general way to the conjunction of the two events. And the further works could be logical operation among the iterated conditional events. So we can consider iterated conditional events, introduce the conjunction of them, and generalize this rule to some other rules where we have iterated conditional in the premise, like what we considered in another paper related to generalized modus ponens. Thank you for your attention.
Question online from Nikki. Please go ahead.
I was just clapping.
Oh, I was thinking I
Nikki
made the mistake.
already told me many questions.
Some questions over here. Laura, you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Luigi. I would like to ask, as you consider iterated conditionals, would it be proper in this context to consider whether the postulates for iterated revision are validated for instance, Darwich and Pearl postulate for iterated revision are validated by this, by your approach also, or maybe this is not proper to consider that kind of postulate. That is, there are additional postulate with respect to standard revision. And for instance, Gabrielis-Berner considered revision with the conditional basis with conditionals. And in that case, that postulates are satisfied, but also others essentially. So this is just a question, there are relationships with the different setting, or you don't see any relationship?
Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, I don't know very well what you are talking about because I didn't check. What I can say is that in this case, the Bayesian updating is different because the import-export principle is not valid. So we need to consider a different version of Bayesian updating. And then I don't know. What I know it is that we have not postulate in our approach. We just apply our the coherence approach based on the notion of the betting scheme of the Finetti and their generalization, and we check if some rules are valid or not. So we do not pretend that some rule should be valid from the beginning, but we trust coherence in order to check if a rule is valid or not. And maybe if it is not valid, we add some constraints, probabilistic constraints or other things, in order to see if that rule can be validated in some particular case or not. So I will check maybe the related paper to see what can be done in order to check the other, the validity of the other postulate. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Because of time, we leave it at that. Please. Okay, then we continue with the last speaker in this session, Sweta Taura, who is online, and he's presenting paper logic and computation for Popper's conditional probabilities. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. All right. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm Shota Motora from an EC Corporation Japan. Today, I'd like to talk to you about logic and computation for proposed conditional probabilities. And the aim of this talk is to propose an algorithm on the basis of theoretical foundations and directly compute the range of values that designated conditional probabilities can take under given constraints. And let's look at a motivating example. Suppose that there is a knowledge base consisting of rules which are expressed by conditional probabilities. And for example, if one has lung cancer, the 5-year survival rate is 32.7%. And if one is male and has cancer, the 5-year survival rate is 59.1%. And smoking increases the probability of lung cancer by 60%. And the expected output is, for example, and the rules contains any other, the knowledge base contains other rules. And the expected output is, for example, the probability that the patient cannot survive for over 5 years. If he has lung cancer, he is a non-smoker and he is male, is greater than or equal to 32.5% and less than or equal to 56.2%. And this is our motivating example. And so today's contents are we first recall a formulation of concept of conditional probabilities of our proportional formulae, which is called a Popper function. And we propose a logic for conditional probabilities, which is many or two sorted monadic second order logic. And we show the definability of the set of probable functions in the second order logic. And then we also show the decidability of the validity problem of a practically important first order fragment of the second order logic with respect to the set of proper functions. And we finally give an algorithm to solve problems such as in the motivating example. And we give conclusion in future work. And our proper function has two input positional formulae. So we first specify the set of formulae. And in this talk, when I write A, it is non-empty and finite set of proportional letters. And a proportional formula, the proportional formulae are defined as usual from the set A by negation and conjunction. And we denote the set of proportional formulae by LA. Please remember the red letters in red. And a function is, a proper function is a function from two proportional formulae to a real number that satisfies our 6 axioms. And you don't have to remember them. PF1 says that for any pair of formulae, there is another pair of formulae that their conditional probabilities are different. This excludes the pathological cases where the values are always 1 for all pair of formulae. And PF2 said that take two formulae are x and y, and if their probabilities are the same given any formula for all formula, and then we may say that these two are probabilistically the same. So if they are in the conditional position, they are always so the same. And PF3 said that x given x, the probability of x given x is 1, and this can be proved, but Popper does not use any real number constants in the axiom of proper functions, trying to minimize the assumption. And PF5 is the product. PF4 means that the probability of conjunction is less than or equal to that of the conjunct. And PF5 is the product rule under the condition of Z. You can see that ignoring Z. And PF6 means that unless the conditional probability is falsity, it's always 1. The probabilities of X and that of not X sum up to 1. And we next propose a logic for conditional probabilities given as follows: two-solid monadic second order logic. The alphabet of our language consists of the following. Sorts are form and real for the formulae and real numbers, and the variables are for first order variables and monadic second order variables for both sorts, and the function symbols are a constant for each proportional letter, and 0 and 1, and F conjunction and F negation for formula algebra, and plus and product and P for proper functions. And the relation symbols is the inequality symbol between real numbers, and logical connectives are negation, conjunction, and the existential quantifiers for strength, and the monadic second order variables for both sorts. And this language also contains equality symbol as a logical symbol, which means that it is interpreted as the standard manner. And we denote L2PF the set, or to denote the set of all formulae constructed from sigma. And F negation and F conjunction are written as infix notation, or it's not prefix, infix, but infix notation, not phi and psi. And source in the quantifiers are expressed if it's clear from the context. And F1 to F6 can be directly translated into the second order language, and we call them PFL, proper function logic. And we can also express unconditional probabilities or absolute probabilities like this. And we can also express a conditional independency for any formula X. And the models are given as follows. A sigma structure is a triple consisting of a structure for form and structure for real and a function. And function is like is of the type of like proper function. And a proper function can be seen as a structure and formula algebra and to the field of reals and the proper function itself. And assignment is assigns as usual as follows to first order variable or of sort of sigma or an element or of the carrier set of a sigma structure, and to the monadic second order variable as a subset of the carrier set of the sigma structure. And for a sigma structure M and assignment M mu, the terms are interpreted as usual, and to, of course, the P is as usual too, by inductively defined. And subtraction relation is also defined as usual, equality, equality, inequality, inequality, and X of T is true, or if T is in the set X, and the negation are not, and conjunction and existential quantifier is true, if there is an element satisfying phi, and a second order monadic for existential quantifier for second order variable is true if there is a subset satisfying phi, and invalidates phi if for any assignment M assignment mu M and mu satisfy phi. And now we show the decidability of the set of proper function. And since the proper function had three parts, the set of formulae and the field of reals and proper function itself. And since we confirmed the definability of these three parts one by one, a set FL of axioms for formula algebra is given as below. This is an extension of Peano's definition of natural numbers. As a symbol, for example, F1 is if not X equals not X prime, then X equals X prime as symbols. And negation and the similar applies to conjunction, and negation cannot be conjunction, and constant cannot be conjunction nor negation. And the F6 is called an induction axiom. It says that if X contains or atomic, not atomic, proportion letters, and containing X implies containing its negation, and containing X and Y implies the containing its conjunction, then X contains all the formulae. And this set of axiom FL define the formula algebra up to isomorphism. And as it is well known that the field of real number is defined in monadic second order logic as the dedicant complete order the field. Here we name real field logic a set of axioms for logic or field of real numbers. And to suppose that M is a sigma structure, and then the following equivalent invalidates formula logic, proper function logic, and real field logic, and that M is isomorphic to a proper function. Here, isomorphic means that this is a structure, and this is a proper function, and for some isomorphism F and G, this this diagram commutes. And next we here show the decidability. A proper formula is the first order formula in the second order language defined above, and where a foreign term occurs only in P, and proper sentence is a closed proper formula. And the PF1 to PF6 are proper sentences. And the validity problem is as follows. For any proper sentence phi, the validity problem with respect to the set of proper functions is decidable. Validity is defined as above. And this can be proved as follows by using 3 translations. And firstly, there are infinitely many proportional formulas, so we translate one into its equivalence classes for it, or the classical equivalence, if you know it, during Lindenbaum-Tarski algebra. And secondly, we eliminate the quantifier by taking disjunction over the equivalence classes. And finally, replace the P by a fresh variable. And the validity problem is equivalent to the validity of the field of real numbers to numbers for any way of taking values. If they can be seen as conditional probabilities, they have to satisfy they always satisfy the proper sentence phi. And since the validity problem in the logic or field of reals are decidable by Tarski, the theorem is proved. And we finally propose an algorithm. Input 1 is probabilities, a set of probabilities whose values we'd like to find, and with some condition which are trivial and they do not restrict the input essentially. And the input 2 is the set of constraints expressed as proper sentences, chi-y to chi-n. And the output is a Boolean combination of equations and inequalities that determine the range of values that proper functions can take under constraints. And the algorithm starts by taking the conjunction of the constraints, and then take all pairs of equivalence classes, except for the pairs appearing in the values in the input probabilities, and compose the formula expressing that there exists a way of taking values for L prime such that the values can be seen as conditional probabilities in proper sense and satisfy the constraints. And then we use a quantifier elimination algorithm to eliminate the quantifiers in the logic for field of reals. In this case, here the logic is first order. And our conclusion in this talk we proposed 2 sorted another second order logic for proper functions, and to show definability of the proper functions in the language of logic, and also shown that decidability of the validity problem for an important first order fragment for this second order logic language, and proposed algorithm that finds the range of values that designated conditional probabilities can take under given constraints. And in the paper, another algorithm based on research and some results on the time complexities of their primary sub-algorithm quantifier elimination on specific inputs are given. And future work, theoretically, this study is the first step of our project of systematizing the relationship between the probability-related algorithms, including Markov logic networks, Bayesian logic programming, and abductive reasoning. And our algorithms shall be used as a baseline in our project. And practically, we shall relieve the restriction that the set A of proposition letters in specified, since our since we cannot assume in practice that all involved proportional letters are specified, and we shall also reduce the computational complexities of the proposed algorithms so that they can be used in practice. Thank you for your attention.
Other questions? We have time for a few questions. This time, do you have a question, maybe, or is it still applauding? You have a question, Nick?
Yes, I'm just struggling with my headset. Yes, I have a question. In Popper functions, you have the probability of A given file sum defined as 1, right? So, but if you do this, you also have the probability of not A given file sum is also 1. And usually one would think that A given the same thing and not A given the same thing should add up to 1. So I wonder, what is the motivation, or what was the motivation for Popper to have this?
So you are asking about the PF6 in this slide, right?
This was on another page.
Another page?
So yes, you had here, this one, the second from the bottom, the probability of A given.
Oh, this is.
Ah, okay. No, I mixed something. I thought this is file sum.
Oh no, it's just an example of a formula. Yes.
But I recall that Popper has that, right, somewhere, or was it Adams?
Or I'm sorry, I didn't get your question.
There are some approaches which define
yes.
When you condition on a contradiction on file sum, then you define the conditional probability to equal to 1. And I'm saying that this is strange because if you do this, then also, for example, if you have A given file sum is 1, then also not A given file sum is also 1, right? By using this. But A given something and not A given the same thing, they should add up to 1, right?
A given something and not A given something add up 1, yes.
Yeah, so I wonder, is this in Popper functions or not?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I need time to figure out that question.
Okay, I see there's online Jasper. We have time is almost over, so if it's a short question and you can give it in a short time and it can be shortly answered, it's okay. Do you think?
I can make my question short. As for the answer, we'll see. I'm not too familiar with this field, so I do apologize if it's a silly question. But I was wondering, so you're starting from these conditional probabilities, and then you want to compute bounds on some other conditional probability. I'm wondering, what's your reason for going through Popper functions and logic and all this kind of stuff? Why not go the standard way, and then you can use linear programming, for example, to infer bounds based on other. Why go this way? Because at this point it seems it's not really helping. I mean, you get algorithms, but they're not practical yet, and all this kind of. So why go through this route? Is there an advantage there? Is there a reason to take this approach?
Oh yeah, the initial motivation was that there are many, I think, knowledge base are written by rules with some values, kind of confidence values, and I'd like to kind of interpret the values.
And you're saying this doesn't work with just the usual probability approach? In the case I know, it is kind of heuristic
it was too heuristic.
Okay, I think I will keep it as this.
Sure.
It's short comment without an answer. That's okay.
I think that Popper functions can be related to the conditional probability defined by means of coherence, because in some particular case it can properly manage zero probability to the conditioning event. So this can be also useful to use this structure instead of the standard classical probability. But the question is, it will be interesting to apply your algorithm with some symbolic value instead of numerical one, x and y, and compare the result of the inference with some related result of Angelo Giglio, for instance, on inference rules, on monotonic reasoning, and so on. So this could be just a way to compare the two approaches.
Okay. Well, thanks. Till 10 to 11.
Great. Just an announcement for the best student paper prize. So do you want it? Okay. Please go here. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Taking that. Am I on the camera yet?
You are.
Yes. Very good. And so we were impressed at the quality of the student papers, and we formed a committee to consider them, involving the local organising committee, ourselves, and including Milan as well. And we came up with a clear conclusion that the best student paper was the smallest probability interval a sequence is random for a study for 6 types of randomness by Flores Perso, Jasper de Bock, and Gerd de Komen. And so if Flores could come up with there'll also be a sort of a financial prize as well. That will appear later. Thank you. Okay, well, should I say so? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So the next session starts at 10:50, is it? Yeah, I think so.
Oh wow, that's very
10 to 11. 20 minutes.
10 minutes.
So I would probably mispronounce your name, so I will just say the title.
Yeah, do you want me to share my screen now?
Oh yeah, sure, why not? If you like.
Nico, we are ready also.
Is everybody here?
Everybody is here.
And some people are still arriving, right? So we can wait now.
Yeah, we have time.
Okay, and I guess everybody can see the slides as usual, right? You do not see what I'm doing here because of my rights. Okay, great. Then I think we can start. So welcome everybody to the last session of the conference. We have 3 talks in this session, and the first talk is analogies between sentences, theoretical aspects, preliminary experiments. Please go ahead.
Okay. So, Gilles is speaking. I know it will be tough to believe, but this work is a joint work between French scientists and Australian scientists. You know, it's quite amazing. So we are talking about analogies between sentences. Analogies is a well-known concept, but between sentences, it's another story. And then I will not talk about analogical reasoning in the large, but simply about analogical proportion, which are in a way a building block for analogical reasoning. An analogical proportion is just a statement of the form A is to B as C is to D, which is usually written like this, you know, A colon B double colon C colon D, and which can be read as A is to B as C is to D. I give you an example just in green here. Prague is to Czechia as Berlin is to Germany. And I think everybody will agree on this. But when I go, when I go to the next steps, so instead of using word, I use sentences. John sneezed loudly, which is A. Mary was startled, B. And Bob took an analgesic, C. His headache stopped, D. So instead of having only word, we have sentences. Here they are very short, but they could be very long, okay? So in an analogy A, B, C, D, you can have diverse type of item. In that case, Prague, etc., you have just word. But in that case, you have sentences. The question is, how can we make it a little bit clearer? So the main idea is to come back to the fundamental, which are the 3 postulates defining what is usually known as an analogy. And the most important one is the last one, which is central permutation, telling us that we can exchange the middle guy. We can exchange B and C here to get C and B. So if A is to B as C is to D, then A is to C as B is to D. So starting from these 3 postulates, you can deduce more or less immediately the different properties that I do not investigate more here, but just one which is which will be useful for the remaining of this talk, internal reversal, telling us that if A is to B as C is to D, obviously B is to A as D is to C. So doing that, because you have 24 permutation of A, B, C, D, you have, in fact, 3 classes of equivalence under the analogy relation. But unfortunately, it doesn't work properly for sentence. Have a look. I start from my sentence analogy from the second slide. So we can understand that A is to B as C is to D just because A or B, A entails B and C entails D. So more or less the relation between the first element in a pair And the second one is the same in the two cases, A, B, C, D. But now, using central permutation, I told you that we can switch B and C. So instead of having this block, I will have this one. John sneezed loudly, Bob took an analgesic, etc., etc. So it's not clear that this is an analogy, and we could say maybe central permutation is not relevant. Okay, so if central permutation is not relevant, maybe we can bin it, as simple as that, and replace it by something that makes sense for sentences. And the one we have chosen is internal reversal, meaning you cannot switch B and C as we did with central permutation, but for a pair, if we reverse on both sides, it is still an analogy. So if I reverse B and A and D and C, then I get a new analogy. So obviously, this is a weaker definition of analogical proportion. We still keep the two initial postulates, but we replace central permutation, the red one, by the green one. And now, obviously, if I am back to our initial example of sentence analogies, it works in that case just because the link between B and A, we could say B is a consequence of A in a way, and D is a consequence of C as well. So Mary was started, B, because John, because A, and is headache stopped, D, because C. So in a way, the initial analogy, where the link between the two sentences in a pair is just entailment, I would say, is a consequence of, we move to the passive forward by reversing the element. So I would say at this stage, at least formally, internal reversal, replacing central permutation makes sense. But the question is, can we validate this story, at least empirically? So we start with something very simple. We start from a data set, which is Google, coming from Google, which is a set of, I don't remember, but a lot of analogy between words. You have 4 words, and A, B, C, D, and they build an analogy. So what we have done, it's very basic, I agree with that. We have built template of sentences with all inside, and we have replaced the different all by words coming from Google analogy. Example, citizen in, we put Chicago, are more likely to vote. Citizen in Illinois are more likely to, because Chicago is to Illinois as Dallas is to Texas, for instance. So you have this kind of story in the Google word analogy. So doing this, we create 52,000, in the range of 52,000 quadruple of sentences, which are
He seems to be frozen, or is it just me? I think the audience. You're back. I think we had a connection problem.
Your internet connection is unstable. It is true.
Is it mine or yours?
For me, it seems to be okay. On my side, I don't see anything. And you?
Sorry.
We see you. We can continue. We see you now, but you froze before. But you
see me? Maybe I can stop my video. I stop my video.
Okay.
Is it better?
Yes. At the moment, we can hear you, yeah?
So I carry on?
Please, yeah.
Okay, so we have at the end of the day in the range of 600 analogy. And then like this, you know, we have sentence A, B, C, D, blah, 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 okay? So it's very basic, but at least it is a way to check something. The second data set we use is a Penn discourse tree bank data set, where you have much more realistic sentences, and it's a set of pair A-B, where sentence A is related to sentence B via a relation belonging to temporal, contingency, expansion, comparison, etc. An example of temporal relationship between two sentences A and B: the results were announced, the stock market closed. Or this happens when nervous stock investor dump equity and buy treasuries. So we will say A is to B as C is to D. So starting from this big data set, we can, given two pairs belonging to the same relation, we can build an analogy. So we select randomly 25,000 in this big guy, and then this led to 300,000 instance. And now what we want to do is to embed sentences exactly as you embed words with Word2Vec or Glove or whatever, and then to try to build a classifier and to see if we can recognize this internal reversal postulate. So embedding, in both, we have two options. In both cases, we start from a Glove of fast text, which is another type of embedding. But you have a set of word, which is a sentence, okay? So you embed every word and you get the average of the vector. So in that case, it is very simple and relatively efficient, but obviously you have lost the structure of the sentence. You have no idea about the order. The second idea is to say, okay, I still embed using Glove or fast text, but in that case, I don't do the average. I use a discrete cosine transform, which is a technique mainly used in data compression, etc., but which has been used in, if I remember, in 2019 for the first time, to embed sentences. So I have my sentences, and at the end of the day, I get a vector, dimensions 50, 100, 200, or 300. Okay, and in that case, the interesting point is the fact that we can recover, because this DCT is reversible, we can recover the order of the words. So it's more clever, I would say. Okay, then we use standard classifier without doing much. So using random forest, which are not bad, which are relatively effective classifier. And we build the CNN that I explain here. So this CNN, we have your sentence, which is a vector, A, B another vector, C another vector, D another vector. And in fact, this can be viewed, I would say, as a picture, a kind of, as an image. And then we apply convolution on this. Two convolution lawyer. And then we finish with a dance and then 0 and 1. Okay, yes, it's an analogy, 1, 0, no, it's not an analogy. Okay, so what are the results at this stage? What are the results at this stage? So with the Google experiments, obviously we have very good result when you use average. As you can see, average, very good result. So probably too good to be true in a way. Not too good to be true, but very good because it's very simple, and a CNN can do a very good job on this. Regarding DCT, the transformation is more subtle, I would say, and then the results are not so good. And I would say, but one point is, we don't care about the dimension, you know, we don't care about dimension, and we don't care about Glove or fast text. Same story. And now when we go for the next data set, which is the Penn tree bank. Then the results are, I would say, average. Still, we have the fact that there is no dimension and absolutely no impact on the result. But now, average embedding give more or less similar result than discrete cosine transform. So, but nevertheless, we are still better with 20 from this guy. Okay, so I conclude my story. Do you hear me?
Yes, you're back. You vanished for a few seconds, but now we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so I would say we are happy. It's a bit, we are not completely happy, but a bit. So central permutation, we bin it, and we replace with the internal reversal, and our basic experience validates in a way this idea, validates between quotes, I would say. What this replacement of central permutation by inverse internal reversal bring in terms of formal consequences, and from an empirical viewpoint, obviously we have to move to transformers, because you know transformers are the next big guy in every NLP task, and probably more than that. And obviously try to think about relevant application like chatbot or argumentation. Okay, thank you very much for your time. I am happy to be with you, even if it's virtual. So I put my camera. I put my camera on again. I'm not sure you have here everything, but I hope so.
Great. So do we have questions in the audience? We zoomed in.
Chat, I think it was yeah.
I think somebody is clapping.
I've
A, B, C, and D in this context are essentially propositions.
Yeah.
And so what you've got is, you're looking at is a relationship between conditionals. So A to B, the conditional A to B and C to D, as in pairs of propositions. So by conditional, will just mean a pair of propositions in this case. So do you expect that relationship, or does it to be an equivalence relation between pairs? In particular, do you have a transitivity property that if A to B is like C to D and C to D is like E to F, A to B is like E to F?
No, we don't have this. Even for standard analogy, you know, with the three axioms, the three postulate, reflexivity, symmetry, and central permutation, even for this, you cannot deduce, you cannot prove transitivity just because you have model of this three axiom where transitivity is not valid. So you cannot deduce transitivity from this. And a fourth theory, I would say, I'm not sure it's English, but with the weak proportion, you can't. So we don't expect transitivity, despite the fact I would agree that at least intuitively it is acceptable, because if we start from the basic analogy, which is arithmetic proportion, A minus B equals C minus D, then A, B, C, D are the summit of a parallelogram, then in that case, this is an analogical proportion and this is transitive. And intuitively, it's I would say, satisfactory. But when you put the axiom, crude row axiom, you cannot infer transitivity. So it's not something that we expect from our experience.
Okay, so you wouldn't want to add that as an axiom. You feel it's not intuitive.
Sorry?
I didn't catch up your answer, your question, sorry.
You don't think transitivity is intuitive?
Yes, so I would say two options. Currently, transitivity is not deducible from the axiom. Now, when we experiment, we didn't check transitivity, but if in our experiment we check that transitivity hold for analogical sentences, then we have to come back to the formal model which doesn't fit with the real life. And then maybe we will have to add this transitivity axiom. Or maybe another option is to change from central permutations, change from internal reversal, design a brand new one, such that transitivity is deducible. But it's another story, I would say.
All right. So I think we have to move on. But
Yeah, no problem. So I stop sharing.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. Okay, so the second talk is complexity of non-emptiness in control argumentation frameworks.
Yes. All right. So I hope everything is okay. You can hear me and you can see my screen.
Perfect.
All right, then I think I can start. All right. Hello, welcome to this talk about complexity of non-emptiness in controlled argumentation frameworks. This is joint work together with Daniel Neugebauer and Jörg Rothe. Like the title already states, we talk again about abstract argumentation. We already heard the whole definition of abstract argumentation frameworks quite often this week, so I will just keep it shortly. So an abstract argumentation framework defined by Dung is a pair of arguments in the text, usually depicted in a directed graph where our arguments are the nodes and a text are the edges between two nodes. So we have an argument A, a text, and argument B. All right. The reason, based on these argumentation frameworks, we use the idea of semantics, which are functions such as set can be considered jointly acceptable. We will look at the classical ones like admissible. So a set is admissible if it's conflict-free and every element in set is defended. Complete if we have next to our admissibility also we defend if we defend an argument, it's also inside our set. Then we have preferred, which are subset maximal complete sets, and stable. Stable are sets which are text everything not inside. And last but not least are the grounded ones, which are subset minimal complete sets. All right. Now to the more interesting part, or rather new part for this workshop, which would be the so-called controlled argumentation frameworks, which are an extension of the abstract argumentation frameworks, which motivation is that the abstract argumentation frameworks cannot handle any kind of uncertainty. So for every situation, for every argument, for every attack, we are sure that they exist. We can never say, all right, this argument may be existing, but we are not 100% sure. So for this concept, the idea of controlled argumentation frameworks, short CAF, were introduced, which are the three tuple out of fixed, controlled, and uncertain elements. The fixed arguments are arguments we know are existing. And in a sense, they are these abstract argumentation frameworks, which we actually just extend. Then we have the controlled part, which are elements whose existence only depend on an agent, and uncertain parts whose existence depends on the environment. One important fact about these uncertain arguments are these attacks between D and E. These are so-called undirected uncertain direction attacks. This means that we know there is an attack between D and E. So we know there's a conflict between these two arguments, but we do not know the direction. So we know that either D attacks E or E attacks D or both attacks each other, but we don't know which of them actually exist. So because this framework is kind of complex, let's actually look at an example for that. So we have here a group of people want to discuss to go on a hiking trip or not. And then we have one agent whose legs is hurting. So she could consider bringing forward this argument of that her leg hurts, so they cannot go for a hike. But she could also consider not presenting this argument because she actually is looking forward to go on a hike. So this argument would be considered a controlled argument because it's one agent has the option to present this argument or not. However, the argument of it rains, so they cannot go for a hike, would be an argument which is considered uncertain because no agent can actually influence the weather, usually. So this example shows really this split between uncertain arguments and controlled arguments. All right, to reason on these controlled argumentation frameworks, we use the concepts of controlled configuration and completion. A controlled configuration is a set of arguments which agent actually selects and then discards everything unwanted out of these calves. And using this controlled configuration, we can then construct a so-called completion. So for every uncertain element, it then will be decided if an argument and attack will be added or left out of our framework. So in the end, we then construct an abstract orientation framework like we see in the example. And in the end, we can use the same ideas as for abstract orientation frameworks to actually reason. So we can use the extension to actually find the jointly acceptable sets. And you still have to keep in mind this attack between D and E, which before was this uncertain directed attack. We still have to refer to this property. All right, now to the actual part of what we did. Like the title states, we talk about the complexity of non-emptiness. What is the non-emptiness problem? This problem is in general for any abstract orientation or any orientation framework of does there exist a set of arguments which considers a specific semantics. So it's a really fundamental problem of reasoning based on abstract orientation. Even all these problems listed here, so verification, acceptance, and controllability, all of them are using the fact that even ask for sets of arguments which satisfy a specific semantics. For example, the verification problem asks for a given set of arguments if this set actually satisfies a specific semantics. So if the existence problem already returns us the fact that there does not exist such a set of arguments, then we already know the answer of all these questions and we can already answer them with no. So it is interesting to know the complexity of this really fundamental problem because all other problems are usually based on that. So if we know the existence of a problem, we can maybe defer the answer of the other problems. But if we know that there does not exist anything, we also already know the answer of all the other problems. So let's actually take a look at this problem. So first, the definition of this non-emptiness problem for the controlled orientation frameworks is as controlled non-emptiness. This N stands for any kind of semantics. And then given a controlled orientation framework, the question is then, does there exist a controlled configuration such that for every completion, we have a non-empty extension. One note on this non-emptiness is that this problem is trivial for all semantics except the stable one if we do not restrict ourselves on non-empty extension. So let's look at our results. So we see that this problem is in P for conflict-free and grounded semantics. So we need to find an polynomial time algorithm which actually proves this problem. To just keep it short, this part for conflict-free, we just need to find one argument which is has no self-attack. And for grounded, we just need to find one argument without any incoming attack. All right, for admissible, complete, preferred, and stable, we see that we are sigma-free complete. So we are in the third layer of the polynomial time hierarchy. So it's a really hard problem. let's actually look at the idea of this proof. So to do that, we use the reduction from sigma-free satisfiability. So a Boolean formula such that we have there exists assignment for x such that for all y's we have an assignment for z such that our formula can be evaluated to true. Using this instance, we can then construct our controlled argumentation framework in the sense that this argument phi has to be in every admissible extension, which is not empty. Otherwise, we cannot construct any admissible set because we have D, which attacks everything, not being phi, and phi is the only attacker of D. So to make it happen, we have to attack all the attackers of this phi, which are these C arguments. These C arguments are called clause arguments. So for every clause in our example, we have one argument. So we have for the first clause, we have the argument C1, and the C1 is attacked by the literal arguments. And for each literal in our formula, we have one argument. So we have here the argument x1. So we have the argument x1 in our graph itself. And one literal argument attacks the clause if it's part of this clause. So x1 is part of the first clause. So we have this attack from x1 to c1. All the other details, why we actually have the direction of the attacks, why x needs to be controlled, y needs to be uncertain. For that, we refer to the paper. Just one point where we can actually think about how we can now solve it, our problem. So if we have a working assignment for our formula, then we can also construct a non-empty extension in the sense that if x1, for example, in this example, would be labeled with true, then we know that we have to add x1 into our extension. All right. To now compare our results of complexity with the other results. First, for the controllability problem, whose complexity proofs are shown here on the slide in blue. Just a short reminder, what is the controllability problem? So given a control argumentation framework and a set of arguments, does there exist a control configuration such that for every completion, this T is part of every or some extension? So we have these two cases. If we see our results, we see that the non-emptiness problem is easier for the grounded semantics, but it has the same complexity for the admissible, complete, preferred, and stable for the credulously problems, but it's harder than the skeptical problem. So in a sense, it is not useful to first ask for the non-emptiness problem to actually solve the other problems. Now, to actually compare our results with not this general systems like the controlled argumentation frameworks, we want to also compare it with abstract argumentation frameworks and incomplete abstract argumentation frameworks, which are in a sense also extensions of abstract argumentation frameworks, but also just restriction on curves in a sense that an incomplete argumentation framework is a controlled argumentation framework without the uncertain part. So here we again have the results for the non-emptiness problems. In these cases, we have two different cases for the incomplete argumentation frameworks. They are defined as follows. So we have our incomplete argumentation framework. And the question then is, does there exist a completion of our incomplete argumentation framework, which has a non-empty extension? So, and we see here in the results that by adding one level of uncertainty into our framework, we have one jump in complexity. So from NP complete and our abstract argumentation framework, we jump to P2, P complete in the incomplete argumentation framework case, to then to the third layer in our controlled argumentation framework case. All right. Recently, the idea of possible controllability was introduced. So we also took a look at a possible variation of this non-emptiness problems. And the idea behind this possible problem is, instead of asking for all completion, we just want to ask if there is a completion which actually satisfies our property. So in a sense, given our KEF, does there exist a control configuration such that there is a completion with a non-empty extension? This problem is NP-complete for admissible, complete, preferred, and stable. The reduction idea is based on the proof for incomplete argumentation frameworks. All right, to conclude, we see again our results here on this slide. We see that the problem is easy for conflict-free and grounded, but it's quite hard for all the other semantics. So in a sense, it's not a good idea to first ask for a non-empty extension or for the existence of this non-empty extension to then solve the other problems. All right, for future work, of course, we can analyze more semantics like a staged one or a naive one, and also like in related work already done, we can add weights to the uncertain elements and then again ask the same question of the existent problems and the complexity of this problem. And of course, we can also follow a probabilistic approach. All right, thank you.
Thank you. So do we have questions in the audience? If you have questions in the live audience, maybe just go ahead. Yes, Henry has a question.
Yes, in general, there can be dependencies between arguments, like sub-argument relations, and there can then also be dependencies between attack relations. So it may be that particular completions are ruled out. If you want to take these dependencies into account, would that have an impact on your results or on your methods?
So just to understand it clearly, so we just consider an approach like the set AF approach. So if we have A and B together, then C is attacked. Not A and B alone can be attacked. Just to summarize your idea.
For instance, if C attacks A, and A is a sub-argument of B, then C also has to attack B in some underlying accounts of argumentation. So a completion where you only add the attack from C to A is ruled out, because you also have to add the attack from A to C. So this is one example.
Okay. Yeah, in these completions, let me actually go back to the slide for the completions. One idea is also that we have to, if for example, we have an argument E, and we know that attack between D and E is always there if we have the argument E. So E, in a sense, we are not sure if E is actually always an argument, or we cannot in a group agree that E is actually an argument, but we can agree on if we consider E as an argument, then there is an argument to D. I think that's the concept you're looking for, and I think that should also not change anything on the results.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions in the audience or at home? So if not, maybe let me ask one quick question. So in your conclusions, you mentioned probabilistic frameworks. So do you think something new happens here, or does this just correspond to something that already exists when you add probabilities here? So specifically, it seems, but maybe I'm missing something, but it seems that when you add probabilities here, what you end up with would basically be the setting where you have a probability distribution over the graph structure where nodes and edges can be missing. And I think this has been investigated before.
Yeah, I also think it's quite similar to this approach. I think that idea here would be to actually only put this probability on the uncertain elements, but that's also done in a sense that we can also say, all right, these arguments have the probability of 1, so we know they always exist and only restricted to certain elements. So in that sense, this would, I assume, would result in the same situations.
Yeah. Okay, and then on Tuesday, I think Jean-Guy talked about controlled argumentation frameworks. Have you thought about that?
No, incomplete. Constraint incomplete.
So,
yeah.
So this is something different?
I have to remember what Jean-Guy talked about. But yeah, I think his approach was with sets of the text, if I remember right.
Right. Yeah, your approach.
I don't have his approach in mind, but yeah, it's really this step between incomplete argumentation frameworks and controlled argumentation frameworks. There's still these controlled argumentation frameworks has a little bit more features which the incomplete argumentation frameworks do not have, but could be added into, but still not creating the same setting.
Yeah, but there are also lots of open complexity questions, he said.
Yes, definitely.
Right. All right, thank you. So I think we are running out of time, so thank you again. And then we will move to the third talk. I think this is a live talk. Oh, yes. And the topic is addressing popular concerns regarding COVID-19 vaccination with natural language argumentation dialogues. Okay, so the camera is ready. We can see your screen. It's a little bit large. But maybe it's just a time. Yes, no, it's perfect.
Yeah? Cool. Okay, hi. Thanks for making it to the very last talk of this conference. I would say best comes last, but clearly not, otherwise would be Flora's present today. But it's me. And so yeah, my name is Lisa, my supervisor is Anthony Hunter, we're from University College London. And yeah, today I will present you my paper addressing popular concerns regarding COVID-19 vaccination with natural language dialogues. So before I start the talk, I guess it's important to say that, well, there are many argumentation formalisms presented at conferences like ECSQARU, but there is not that much work done on actually like using them and evaluating them in real life applications. So me and Anthony were trying like to bridge this gap a bit and actually we're working on like real life applications. So quick intro to chatbots. So I guess at some point in your life you all interacted with some sort of chatbot, but again, just as a quick recap in case you didn't, it's a software agent and that can converse with you via speech or text. In our case, we're only dealing with text. And well, they can be applied in all sorts of domains, mainly in like customer support and stuff like that. But obviously, like they're really versatile. You can use them in anything you want. So there is a potential of them being used as agents in dialogical argumentation systems. And so, as an example, obviously not limited. We've also developed other chatbots in the past. Chatbot could be a persuader, right? That could persuade people who are not willing to take a COVID-19 vaccine to actually get it. And so obviously the chatbot needs to be aware of arguments of the people that don't want to take the vaccine in order to then present suitable counter-arguments. And this can be represented in a directed graph. And the proceedings arguments need to be crowdsourced. I'll talk about more about this in the next slide. Because well, the chatbot like needs to know what people think, and those arguments need to reflect the reasons of their beliefs, actions, inaction, whatever the chatbot tries to convince you to either believe or do or stop doing. So you could also imagine a chatbot that tries to convince you to maybe do more sports, for example. The acquisition of the chatbot's arguments depends a bit on the domain. In the past, we've also created a chatbot where even the chatbot's arguments were crowdsourced. In this specific example, we didn't want to do it. You know, we're talking about like a serious issue here. So the argument that the chatbot presents should either be crafted or at least assessed by medical experts. So yeah, we've done that. So why crowdsourcing? So first of all, not all reasons for COVID-19 hesitancy might be presented in the literature. And even if, like, the language might vary a lot, right? So here I've copy-pasted an example from an article that talks about why people don't take the vaccine, and you see just the language is really different, right? So like if I would just, without using crowdsourcing, try to come up with arguments, I would not know how people would actually phrase them in a real conversation. So you see, here it says there's been a few reports circulating online about people who didn't get vaccinated because they were generally healthy and didn't think they were susceptible to severe COVID-19. But then if you crowdsource them and ask people, well, why don't you want to take the vaccine? They say, oh, you know, I'm young, I don't have any pre-existing conditions, I'm going to be fine. So the language is like completely different. And so an option is to either present them with a menu where they can choose, but we wanted to actually use, like, give people the opportunity to use free text input. And well, in order to do that, we actually needed to crowdsource arguments to see how they look in real life. And I mean, it's nice because it's easy to collect a lot of data in a short amount of time, right? You just put it on a Google, Microsoft form and then just recruit participants and ask them, why don't you want to take the vaccine, and they will give it to you. And then because when you acquire this data, it's also then you can automatically extract keywords that then represent concerns of why people don't want to take the vaccine. So obviously there were, like, the word side effects came up quite often, like long-term side effects, then infertility, Bill Gates microchip once in a while as well. So yeah, so you can automatically actually extract them. And yeah, so here's an example, right? So the chatbot stance, which is like the root node, is you should get the vaccine, right? And then you have like attacking concerns, you know, that represent why people don't want to take it. So for example, fast development, that makes it less trustworthy, or possible short-term side effects. And then you can see arguments that the chatbot will give attacking these concerns. And so we started with an initial, actually quite small graph, with only 7 concerns. Each had like 2 to 4 counter arguments, with so 19 leads in total. So that was for the initial chatbot. Then during the during the chats, the chatbot got smarter, not in real time, but once new chats came in, then we could again analyze what people said and try to extract even more concerns that we didn't get in the initial stage. So we had 3 hypotheses. One was that, well, actually a small set of arguments can be used to represent most of the possible arguments that the normal users would know, and appropriate counter-arguments that can be utilized by a chatbot to create persuasive dialogues. And then given a novel domain like COVID-19, that the arguments that address the same concern are sufficiently similar. So this is what allowed us to have like this concern argument graph, that we actually didn't need attacking arguments from the user, but we could group them together under concerns. And just by identifying that, the chatbot could give an appropriate counter-argument. And well, we checked also whether, you know, at the end of the day, what's the point of having a chatbot if actually you could just present all those arguments on a static website? So we checked that as well, whether like the interactive chatbot is actually more persuasive than a static website. So how we recruited participants. So obviously we wanted to recruit people who don't want to get the vaccine, otherwise there would be no point. We would be just like, oh yeah, if they before that already were convinced, then well, we would get really good results, but would be meaningless. So we made sure that these people really are against. So we ran a preliminary study where we just recruited people that indicated that they are very unlikely, somewhat unlikely, or in the middle to get the vaccine. And so 240 was then chatted with the bot, because we didn't want to have 50-50 split, because we wanted to, well, actually, we wanted more chats and not just waste half of our participants on just reading a static website. And as I said, we also had several, I call it iterations of the bot. So after each 60 people, we analyzed the arguments again, extracted new concerns, and expanded the graph. Yeah, so how it worked, they were directed to a form, asked how likely they would get the vaccine, they chatted with the bot, and after that they were asked again. And then we measured the change in stance before and after. So here's an example, just like how it started. Hey, I'm COVID Backbot. Hi, a bit of info that, you know, please click on the links. Copy paste them into a new window so that the window doesn't close, and to tell them that you can always end the chat by typing quit. So anyway, so this is how the interface looked. How the chatbot understood the user input. So as I said, we automatically extracted concerns, and then we just, well, used like, a logistic regression classifier that was trained on those concerns, on those arguments, and the concerns were the labels. And so each time an argument came in, like the chatbot got an argument, it was just, well, the classifier tried to identify the concern, and then the chatbot presented an appropriate counter-argument. If not, so obviously like people can also type something that chatbot doesn't understand. So we had like 3 what we call default arguments that, like, you know, in case the chatbot doesn't understand it, it will just say, oh, but have you considered, you know, that we'll be able to travel again, and stuff like that. But if you think about it, this is also how it works in a real conversation, right? Like if at some point I don't know anymore how to counter you, I'll just be like, but have you considered, and I will just change the topic. So here's an example, right? So the person says, I'm scared of side effects. The concern is side effect, the chatbot tells them, well, yes, side effects like high temperature and stuff is common, however, it's not dangerous, way less dangerous than getting COVID-19. Then the person says, well, but we don't know what will happen in long term. Again, the chatbot was able to identify it, provides a counter-argument. The last one, you can see, wasn't able to identify it, and then the chatbot just like diverts a bit and says, despite that, if enough people get vaccinated to achieve herd immunity, we can finally go back to normal life, etc. So here's the breakdown of people before and after talking to the bot. So you can see before that obviously 0% somewhat likely and very likely, and then after talking to the bot, about 20% of our participants, they changed the stance to the positive. So we did not count very unlikely to somewhat unlikely. I mean, we don't consider that a significant change in stance. We were only interested if somebody was negative and changed it to neutral, changed it to positive, or negative and changed it to positive. Then, in order to compare to the website, right, we also needed to make sure that the initial distribution was similar, right? Because that otherwise you could argue, oh, if for the website you have, for the chatbot, if a lot of people say neither likely nor unlikely, they're a bit easier to persuade. So we wanted to make sure that we find a distribution of our participants that where they're similar. The problem is because while we were running the study, this whole blood clotting thing popped up, and then you could see that, you know, like with time, people got like less and less likely. It was harder to recruit participants. It was like, yeah, that were neither likely nor unlikely. So you see for the web page, because it was the final stage. Both of them, but chatbot, that was the very final iteration. Quite a few people are very unlikely at the beginning, but it wasn't like that. The distribution was a bit different. Anyway, so comparing that, you can see again the chatbot persuaded more or less 20%, 18 for that particular batch of participants, and the web page only 5%. So we concluded that, like, well, obviously the interactive bit adds to the persuasive effect. So yeah, these are our contributions. We have shown that for new domain, where there exists a lot of uncertainty, actually small argument graph can represent most of the possible arguments, and can be utilized by a chatbot to create persuasive dialogues. We presented a method on how to acquire and structure such a graph. We call it concern argument graph. We demonstrated that it is enough to identify the concern of the argument in order to provide suitable counter arguments. And we also showed that the chatbot is more persuasive than a static web page. So, given that when I was doing this, I was a PhD student, I'm also a teaching fellow, so now I have master's students that can do the work for me. So I also have some future work to present that was already done by a master's student. So obviously arguments are not the sole medium of persuasion, right? And the current setting is quite restrictive. Like we had to tell participants, don't ask questions, don't involve in chit-chat, just give arguments. However, some people require like additional information, right? They ask questions, they want to know what are the side effects, how long do they last, etc. So you can see that here the person asks questions. It's like, what are the side effects? Obviously, because of the simple just binary classifier, it just extracts side effects. Chatbot thinks the person talks about side effects and gives an argument, but this was a question, right? So it doesn't work in this case. Then are the side effects severe? Again, the chatbot gives you a counter argument for side effects, because he thinks the person said, I'm worried about side effects, but that's not the case. So my student introduced a question answering module. Right, so now there are like two classifiers. The first classifier tries to distinguish between an argument and a question. And so we're using BERT, which is a language model, so like a more sophisticated than just a binary logistic regression classifier, because people don't always use the question mark, for example. So that would be cheating, like always assuming after there's a question mark, it's a it's a question. Sometimes people don't, especially in such an informal setting like with a chatbot. And then he also introduced like some text. I think it's about like 1,000 words of just bits and pieces about side effects, about how the vaccine works, mRNA versus the vector ones. And so the BERT module then tries to identify the piece in the text that would answer the question of the user. And so now you see the chat looks a bit different. So instead of giving an argument when the person asks what are the side effects, the chatbot can actually say, hey, I'm glad you asked. The answer is that they can include fever, fatigue, headache, etc. And the person asks, are the side effects severe? The chatbot says, thanks for asking. Obviously, my student's British, so it's very polite. Thanks for asking. The answer is reported side effects to vaccines have mostly been mild to moderate, etc. So now the chatbot is also able to answer questions. Not all of them, but the ones that the student could identify if some people were asking. Cool. So yeah, that was my talk. Again, I think I still have 1 minute or something. So I will put a demo on the screen, and for people like you can just watch, but then also you can ask me questions. So but it's not the question answering bot. It's the other one.
So you will start with a demo, or you will?
I will be starting in the background, but people can ask you questions. Oh, right, sure. Yeah, wait. Yes, Zoom. So is it a new share? Ah, yes, got it.
Oh, yes, now we can see.
Yeah? But now you guys can.
It's like a phone.
Yes. Cool. Yeah, so this is just a recording from my phone where I'm like, where I'm chatting with the bot. But yeah, so you can watch it, but you can also ask me questions.
So are we supposed to watch the demo?
It's up to you. It's up to you. I mean, maybe for the shy people, they can watch, but if anybody asks a question, then
I already see
look about the launch side effects.
I'm sorry. Please just go ahead with your question.
Thanks. Thanks for this very interesting presentation. So I have several questions, but let me just ask one. And this would be, what do you think is the explanation for the difference in effectiveness of static web page and with argumentation-based or somewhat argumentation-based dialogue system? Can it be that it simply is a degree of intellectual engagement you kind of enforce, and if so, are there perhaps simpler tools to achieve this?
That's a good question. One thing that definitely needs to be pointed out, right, that this was not tested in a real-world environment. It was paid participants. But basically, like people who chatted with the bots, they definitely had to engage, right? So otherwise, they don't get paid. I see, they chat with they open the bot, but then don't chat with it. Whereas with the websites, it's really hard to check whether they actually engaged with it or whether they just quickly scrolled, right? So that obviously impacts it, right? That people might have just not read it because they're like, no, I'm not convinced, I don't want to know, I don't want to get the vaccine. Whereas here, they're kind of forced. And I also had in the feedback, I had a feedback form, well, not feedback, but where they said how they changed the stance. I actually asked an additional question of did you feel understood? Did the chatbot answer your gave you good arguments, addressed your concerns? And then I had extra, anything else you want to say, any comments? And quite a few people said that oh, the chatbot made me think. I did not know something, and it made them think, right? That there's some sort, they say something and they don't get approval, right? Because usually people look for approval, right? So people, they live this in this information bubble. So if I don't want to get the vaccine, obviously I will Google, why should I not get the vaccine? And they will get a lot of answers to that. Whereas here they're kind of forced to no, you are wrong, and this is why. And obviously some people, this might make them even more stubborn, but some people who are more open-minded, they might have actually clicked on the links, watched the videos, and this is why they changed their mind.
Thanks.
All right, so Gene has another question.
Yes. Thank you very much for the talk. You should send the link of your bot to Donald Trump, probably. But I have two questions, in fact. Because I didn't catch up exactly at the end of the day, how do you give answer? Do you generate answer, or do you choose an answer among a data set of answer?
No, it's not generated. Yeah. So they were crafted.
It's not generated.
Yeah,
okay.
It's not generated.
And second one is, what kind of tool do you use? Something like Google Dialogflow or
No.
German?
No. So I completely coded it from scratch, the back end. However,
okay.
I'm not a front end web developer. So in the past, I hosted them on Facebook. Right, because they have an API and it makes it just so much easier. But the problem with Facebook is that it's harder to recruit people because they're like, oh, I don't want to share my information, it should be anonymous. So I just got a guy to make a front end for me.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a question.
So here's a question in audience. Yes, please go ahead with questions in the audience.
Okay, so have you considered to also evaluate a third group which engages with a real person and then see what the difference is in effect by engaging?
I personally haven't because I ran out of funding. But actually a colleague of mine, at the University of Alberta, he actually used this bot for his studies as well. And he is actually planning, his idea was it was chatbot, but then telling people that it is a real person and also evaluate that. However, it became illegal apparently in Canada and in the US to actually do that because it would be lying to your participants. So I think he's designing a study exactly like this right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
What does Nico have to say?
So your chatbot seems heavily biased in favor of vaccination. I'm too afraid that people will say, well, you're not taking me seriously, you're just trying to...
Oh yeah, of course, we got a lot of these. Yeah, we had some of the chats were really nasty. The chatbot was also accused of being a communist for some reason. Yeah. Nico, is there anyone else?
Just me. We still have 1.5 minutes. We start late. So just one quick question. So what kind of argumentation technology do you use? Is it just classical argumentation, or do you use some of these probabilistic ideas that Tony considered?
No, I don't. So yeah, it's just classical argumentation where you, as I showed, it's the concern graph and then an attacking argument and that's it. So what we did in the past, I didn't really do it this time, but we did in the past is that we retrospectively analyzed chats and analyzed reactions from people and then pruned the graph this way. If there are arguments and people always react negatively, then what's the point of giving that argument? But we did it with a much bigger graph, whereas here, because we had such a little set of arguments, we didn't retrospectively actually check whether there's anything that should be deleted or anything.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
So,
I
have a quick question.
Okay.
So, what's the improvement in this paper compared with the previous work about chatbots? Is there any special part when you convince people to take a vaccine? I mean, what's the improvement?
So you mean to the previous paper that we or improvement to what exactly?
Professor Hunter also have a paper in years ago in the common conference, and maybe some other papers.
So there are some chatbots, right? Persuasive argumentation technologies that Anthony worked on. They did not allow free text input, so it didn't allow to actually collect new arguments. So this is what I was saying earlier. Of course, in the end, I could save a lot of money, not do the crowdsourcing, just check in the literature, and then present people with a menu. right? But this way, the chatbot doesn't learn anything new, right? So for example, the blood clotting, right? I would constantly need to research and add stuff instead of just talking to people, and then like this way get more data, and data is always valuable, right? And identify more concerns. The previous chatbot that I had, it also allowed free text input. The argument graph was different. It was all crowdsourced and it was very big. So it compared to this one, contained over 1,200 arguments. And it was very hard to prune it. Like people were complaining like, oh, they're duplicates. You know, I say something and then the chatbot says exactly the same thing again, just different words. So here, you know, we made it more compact and without the chatbot repeating anything. And the user just, the chatbot only needing to identify the concern because the arguments were so similar, instead of like in the previous one using a similarity function. This is why the graph was so big, that we could use similarity function to find a similar argument in like this big argument graph. Whereas here it's just like, okay, it's about side effects, cool, easy, classifier, it classifies it, and then the chatbot presents a counter argument.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to say I really enjoyed the conference. So I was a little bit worried about a hybrid event, but I think you organized this really very nicely. So in particular, all these things like Zoom, YouTube, spatial chat, I couldn't really use it, but I think it's really nice. So I think this was really very well organized. So also thanks to the organizers.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, if I could say a few words. Lisa, can you leave the screen?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if the organisers or the PC have got any plans for the closing session, but I just wanted to follow up on what Nico was saying, that it seems like well, I mean, it has been an excellent conference. I mean, I think this hybrid format is very challenging, and my involvement in hybrid conferences before has been somewhat negative. I mean, I found it rather a negative experience, but this conference seems to have worked really well. So I think the local organisation has been fantastic, and I feel that it's managed to cover the compromise between catering to the people who are physically there and those of us online. I felt that even though I've been online, I have been part of the conference and thoroughly enjoyed it and had some nice conversations. So I'm very, very grateful to the conference organisers for that. So yeah, I'd just like to say I'm on the organising committee for ECSQARU. I don't know if anybody else is here from the organising committee, but I know some people like Henri Prade and Louis Godot have been in the conference during the week. And so I can speak on behalf of the steering committee for the conference. And I'd like to say thank you very much to the PC, so Jurina and Nick, for putting together a very nice programme. Particularly under trying circumstances, and it's been really very interesting, very enjoyable to hear all the presentations and all the questions. And I'd really like to thank Jurka, Milan and Vaclav for a fantastic organisation. Even to the point of telling us about the conference dinner on Wednesday evening, it really made me jealous, seeing the pictures of you going up to that lovely restaurant. I've not heard anything about the meal, but I assume you had a lovely evening and the food was excellent, and had some nice wine and perhaps some nice beer as well. So I just want to reiterate, thank you very much for all the work you put into organising the programme and the conference. And the final thing I'd like to say is that the ECSQARU Steering Committee is looking for a venue for 2 years' time. And so if anybody's interested in organising this conference, and I think it's a very nice conference to organise. I did it a number of years ago, and it's a very pleasant community and a very interesting community. given the multidisciplinarity of it. So if anybody would like to take on organising the next instalment, drop me a line and I'll forward whatever suggestions you have to the steering committee, and hopefully we can find a venue and make a decision and so on in the relatively near future. Actually, no, there is one more final thing I want to say. This is actually the 30th anniversary of this conference. So the first one was in 1991 in Marseille. So there's been some history, I think, with this. This is the 16th iteration of the conference. Anyway, I'll close there. So thank you very much again. Yeah.
I think that might be the first time I met you, Tony.
Was in Marseille in 1991, an ECSQARU.
I think it was. I can remember the cafe.
But anyway, just want to echo what Tony said, to thank everyone. And someone else, well, another group of people I'd like to thank is all the people who contributed to the discussion, because having sort of, you know, the questions and lively discussion, I think is a major part of a conference like this, and what sort of differentiates a small conference like this with some of the big conferences where it's hard to have the same degree of discussion. There is one further thing we should say is to do with the YouTube. That if anyone doesn't want their talk to appear on YouTube, could you email Jurka, I suppose, just so that can be cut out, just for if they prefer not, for privacy reasons.
Yeah, I have a question, because on YouTube you can only download videos if you have premium. Is there any way we can get access to downloading them?
We will think about it. The first step, what we plan to do is to edit them. We will delete people that don't want to be there. Yeah. Then we will try to make links from the program of the conference, so that you can go directly to your talk. And then, if you would like to download a piece, just send me an email and we will do it. Yeah, we will do it and you will get it. Otherwise, we will probably not make pieces that are downloadable. But I think it's valuable to keep it there for several reasons, because people may miss some point during the talk. And personally, I would like to listen to some talks again. So I would like these talks to stay there, because they are recorded. But I understand reasons that some people don't like them there, so we will first edit it, and then we will provide links from the program page. And feel free to send us any comments you like to my address or to PC Shares. We really would like to listen to you, what you would prefer, and we will do it as you like. And there is one other message only for people that are here. We have some sandwiches that are waiting for you, so you can take them with you if you would like. They are outside the hall.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything, Regina?
Well, I think everything was so I think that everything was said already. I want to thank two people who came here. Thank you very much. It was nice to have you here and to have a feeling that the time is a bit normal. And thanks to other people who joined through the net, and yeah. It was nice that we were here together. Thank you very much, all of you, the organizers and the technical team.
Oh, of course.
That it worked.
Yeah, I think Adam did a very good job for us here in the studio.
So, shall we declare the conference closed? Those are clapping rather than questions.
Those are clapping.
Thanks very much.